Welcome, everybody. Good morning. Welcome. Welcome to the Westminster Town Hall Forum. I'm Tim Hart Anderson, the senior minister here at Westminster Church, and we're delighted to have you here with us in the sanctuary and with us online via live stream for today's forum with Jonathan Reckford, who will be introduced in 30 minutes. Meantime, we're going to get started with the Rowe Family Singers. If you're feeling kind of, I don't know, like you need a little pick-me-up, you're going to get picked up big time in just a moment. This old-time hillbilly band, as they call themselves, from the tiny community of Kirkwood Hollow, Minnesota. I've Googled Kirkwood Hollow. I've looked for it on a map. Is there a Kirkwood Hollow, Minnesota?
Sure.
Yeah, that's what I assumed. But anyway, you guys mix your original music with old-time bluegrass and gospel tunes. This band has won numerous awards and accolades. They've been named Best Duet at the Minnesota State Fair, which is a big deal in Minnesota. They've been named the world's best jug band twice at the National Battle of the Jug Bands. Woo! And Entertainers of the Year, Album of the Year from the Bluegrass Music Association of Iowa, and they've been awarded a prestigious McKnight Artist Fellowship. They're the real deal. They are led by artists Kim and Quillen Rose, wife and husband leaders, and they promise, quote, every performance raises a ruckus. If you're moved to stand in the aisles and dance, which typically happens on a Sunday at Westminster, but we could do it on a Wednesday. Ladies and gentlemen, the Rowe Family Singers.
Thank you so very much. It is such an honor to be here. We listen to this, listen to the series, of course, on NPR every year. Haven't ever been here in person, so it was one of those things when we got the email from Mr. Danger, I thought it was a joke. What would they ever want with a bunch of hillbillies like us? And it was a very nice surprise. And we've spent a lot of time in our career working on community building and the importance of bridge building. And it's an extra honor to be part of this series and to be working with the CEO of Habitat for Humanity as well. This is a song we wrote on our last record. It's called What Did He Say? Jonah, our bass player, and I have worked together for about 4 years. Jonah and I were in a worship band called the Blood Wash Band, based out of the House of Mercy in St. Paul. And House of Mercy is a pretty progressive church, and my own faith is very progressive. I think of faith as a call to service, and again, it's community building. And playing the kind of music that we do, we play in a lot of small communities. We play in a lot of rural areas. Bluegrass is still a very rural music for the most part. And we're often called to play the part of a conservative bluegrass band, which is what we are not. And so, thank you. But I do think, again, I believe very much in bridge building. And I believe that politics is something that has been manufactured to divide us rather than keep us together. Thank you. And so we try to use our platform as a way to just point out things. And so I use my faith as a bridge, as something to say to people, well, we start with this common interest. We both believe in the gospel, and we follow supposedly we follow the same teachings. And so we wrote this song called What Did He Say? Because, now I know that when you see the banjo, you think, clearly this guy is a rocket scientist. But in fact, I have a hard time sometimes parsing the gospel, and so I'm really partial to the Sermon on the Mount, because it's pretty straight ahead, and it's something that I can understand. And so we just wrote this song called What Did He Say? Based on the teaching of the Sermon on the Mount, just as a reminder, especially during the Trump administration, that locking children in cages is not a Christian thing to do. And all of the policies of that administration are not Christian. And so it was just a little reminder to our more conservative friends that if you're going to walk the walk, you got to talk the talk. Or what is the other way around? If you're going to talk, you know what I mean. Let's just go. What did he say? 1, 2, 3. Where was he born and where did he die? And what were the things that he said? Well, he was born in Bethlehem, then he died at Calvary, and he said, treat folks how you want to be treated. Well, I heard about that sermon on the mount, and I heard about that sermon on the plain. And when I heard those words made my heart pound, 'cause that's the way I want to be living. Oh, where was he born and where did he die? And what were the things that he said? Well, he was born in Bethlehem, and he died at Calvary, and he said, treat folks how you want to be treated. Blessed are the poor and blessed are the meek and blessed are the least among men. Blessed are the merciful, the peaceful and the weak, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Oh, where was he born and where did he die? And what were the things that he said? Well, he was born in Bethlehem and he died at Calvary, and he said, treat folks how you want to be treated. A stranger in your town, find a way to welcome them in. When you see the hungry and run down, help them as if you were helping him. Oh, where was he born and where did he die? And what were the things that he said? Well, he was born in Bethlehem and he died at Calvary, and he said, treat folks how you want to be treated. Yes, he was born in Bethlehem Hail Mary, died at Calvary. And he said, treat folks how you want to be treated. Thank you so much. So this is Kim Rowe. She is the leader of the Rowe Family Singers. She also does this wonderful dancing called Appalachian clogging. It is a traditional American art form that comes out of the Appalachian Mountains. She's also a true Minnesotan, so she hates when I say nice things about her in front of people. She's looking at me right now saying, just shut up and play the song. She has won a number of championships with her dancing. The most recent one was a tie down in southern Missouri. Look at this, I love just the body language, it's fantastic. So we're in this small town in southern Missouri. We're playing this, I'll do the short version. Is that okay, hon? Sure. Okay, great. And she tied for first place with a local woman there. And I think looking back on it that it probably, had they known that it was a tie, that never would have happened because there's no way they were going to let a Yankee win. But so they say, you've heard of the concept of sudden death, right? We said, yeah, we're from a hockey state. Of course we know what sudden death is. And they said, well, have you seen the movie West Side Story? And now we're thinking, well, I don't know what that means. How does that apropos? And they said, well, okay, you know in West Side Story, when they got a problem, they tie the wrists together and then they fight with switchblades? And we said, yeah. And they said, well, this is sudden death. So what we're going to do is we're going to tie their one ankle together each. So the women are now tied at the ankle, and then they tied a switchblade to their other ankle. Now we're in a church, so I don't want to, get into the bloody details, but Kim is still here dancing with us today. So, all right, Buffalo Gals. 1, 2, 3, 4. That is Kim Rowe, ladies and gentlemen. You see why I get a little excited. It's kind of fun. She'll show you the scars on her ankles if you ask later. Gotta ask Nisa.
They're just mosquito bites.
Well, let's see. I introduced Jonah back on the bass, and I'm Quillen, and this is Kim Rowe. This is Mr. Dave Gustafson over here on the mandolin. And we're going to have Mr. David Robinson sing a song for us now.
Hey. Well, just about every Monday night you can find this band down at the 331 Club playing only the finest in the music here in the Twin Cities. But it's also kind of the band's weekly get-together and practice, if you will, where we get to throw out songs and try different things. Feels very much like a Nashville-style songwriting session almost. But this is one that I brought to the band during one of those weeks, and Quinn liked it so much we decided to throw it into the show. It's an old Towns Van Zandt song called I'll Be Here in the Morning. There's no stronger wind than the one that blows down the lonesome railroad line. No prettier sight than looking back on a town you left behind. There is nothing that is real as a love that's in my mind. Close your eyes, I'll be here in the morning. Close your eyes, I'll be here for a while. There are lots of things along the road I'd surely like to see. I like to lean into the wind and tell myself I'm free. But your softest whispers louder than the highways call to me. Close your eyes, I'll be here in the morning. Close your eyes, I'll be here for a while. All the mountains and the rivers and the valleys can't compare to your blue lit dancing eyes and yellow shining hair. I can never hit the open road and leave you lying there. Close your eyes, I'll be here in the morning. Close your eyes, I'll be here for a while. So lay your head back easy, love, and close your crying eyes. I'll be laying here beside you when the sun comes on the rise. I'll be here as long as the cuckoo wails and the lonesome blue jay cries. Close your eyes, I'll be here in the morning. Close your eyes, I'll be here for a while. Yeah. Close your eyes, I'll be here in the morning. Close your eyes, I'll be here for a while.
David Robinson. Thought we'd do another love song here. This is called The Buckeye Tree. You're doing great. 1, 2, 3, 4. The sun was shining, it was so sunny. trees blew a warm breeze. I hugged my baby up close to me underneath the buckeye tree. I said, now listen, listen to me. It all is right as right can be. So stay right here with me underneath the buckeye tree. She said, now listen, listen to me. You know my love, it runs deeply, but the city is calling me from underneath the buckeye tree. When I awoke did me. There was no one close to me. I was all alone, alone was me underneath the buckeye tree. Thank you so much. Well, if you follow country music, you know that Miss Loretta Lynn passed away yesterday at the age of 90 years old. Such an incredible woman, such an important figure in, well, she was the first open feminist in country music. I mean, she was talking about things in the 1960s that long-haired rock bands were afraid to deal with, and she was doing it from Butcher Holler, Tennessee, so, or Kentucky, rather. So we wrote a song in honor of her about a year ago, and thought we'd play it for you today. It's called the Loretta Lynn Blues. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4.
A man is up by 4 o'clock, heading out the door by 5. He don't get home till 6 o'clock, after stopping at sundown. And of course he wants his dinner hot and a smile upon my lips. Well, it's hard with a baby on my apron strings, another on my hip. 'Cause the first one wakes at 3 o'clock and don't fall asleep till 5. Another wakes just after that and cries and cries and cries. And don't forget the oldest boy, he's growing like a weed. And the youngest one pulling at my blouse, looking for the feed. Not honey, not baby, try Loretta Lynn. I'll spell it out, it's W-O-M-A-N. It's not much to expect, checkbook in the black, and that's all those who see. Who does the same work as a man but takes home half the pay? And who gets blamed for things that men do to her every day? Who's the last to sit down to a hot meal on her dinner plate? And who never gets any peace and quiet until the day is late? Not honey, not baby, try to riddle in. I'll spell it out, it's W-O-M-A-N. It's not much to expect, the same respect that you give a man. Not honey, not baby, I'm a woman. Not honey, not baby, I'm a woman. Thank you.
Thank you. We've got one more song for you here. It's just called The World Without a Gun. When I was a young man, late teens, early 20s, I was a skinhead. I was
You should explain what kind of skin.
Well, yeah, that's part of it. But I was affiliated with a group called ARA that was started here in the Twin Cities, Anti-Racist Action. And so we were the skinheads that you didn't have to be afraid of. Because we were getting in fights with the other skinheads that you did need to be afraid of. And, you know, I really truly believe that the best way to solve problems was with my fists. And it felt good, and it felt cathartic, and it felt macho and tough, and, you know, that was the way I was raised, and it felt natural. But as I've gotten older, and as I've had kids, and I see what that does, which is A, nothing, it doesn't to solve the problem, but B, more importantly, it just perpetuates itself. I've started looking at other heroes. I've started looking at Dr. Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks and Mahatma Gandhi and all these folks, you know, who have embraced nonviolent revolution. And I think that if you look at the history, those are the things that have actually caused effective change. When we've Thank you. So I wrote this song, we wrote this song called The World Without a Gun, and if anything else, it's just a reminder to myself over the last 4 years when I really wanted to shave my head again and get out in the streets with a baseball bat, that probably wasn't the best solution to how I was feeling. So let this be a reminder to me, if nobody else. Stop shaving your heads, kids. Let your hair grow. World Without a Gun. 1, 2, 3. Jesus changed the world without a gun. He told us, love thy neighbor, everyone. Though on the cross they bowed his head, still the word was spread, and Jesus changed the world without a gun. When all is said and done, empires crumble, everyone. Force of might seem like can't build a foundation. Love's the only sun that can shine on everyone. And Jesus changed the world without a gun. Rosa Parks changed the world without a gun. She sat strong even when the police come. Started a boycott, quickly spread, fought them racist hard and head. Rosa Parks changed the world without a gun. When all is said and done, empires crumble, everyone. Voice and mind seem like can't build a foundation. Love's the only sun that can shine on everyone. And Rosa Parks changed the world without a gun. Changed the world without a gun. He shared his dreams on the steps of Washington. Justice is how the history bends, though he knew he'd miss the end. Dr. King changed the world without a gun. When all is said and done, empires crumble, everyone. Voice and mind seem like can't build a Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Please remember to be kind and to be safe and to treat the world and the folks around you how you like to be treated.
Help make the world go round, folks. Thanks.
Hope to see you again. God bless.
Greetings and welcome to the Westminster Town Hall Forum. Before we go any further, another round of applause for the Rowe Family Singers. I knew we would get kind of warmed up for this presentation today by the Rowe Family Singers, and I'm grateful for their presence, their music, their commitments to our community. It's pretty wonderful, and it feeds right into what we're trying to do today in the forum. Excuse me, I'm Tim Hart Anderson. I'm the senior minister here, and I'm about to cough again. It's not COVID, don't worry. I've already been there, done that. I'm the senior minister here at Westminster Church on Nicollet Mall in beautiful downtown Minneapolis, and isn't it a gorgeous fall day out today? I'm the moderator of the forum. We're pleased today to welcome the CEO of Habitat for Humanity, Jonathan Reckford, to our forum. For more than 40 years, the Westminster Town Hall Forum has invited speakers of conscience to address issues of the day from an ethical perspective. Today is the kickoff for a new fall season at Town Hall Forum. We're presenting this fall a four-part series called Healing Our House Divided. We'll hear from four intellectually diverse speakers on ways to address polarization in politics and culture in America. They'll offer ways to bridge our divisions and build a more respectful, pluralistic society. We invite you to visit our website, westminsterforum.org, to see a list of the upcoming programs. Lisa Pruitt on the rural-urban divide coming up, Chris Blattman on international peace building, and former Attorney General Eric Holder speaking on democracy. All of these programs, including today's, are made possible because of individual supporters. We invite you to consider supporting the forum if you can. Those of you in person here should have been given a donation envelope. If you would, use that for making a contribution on your way out. You'll find baskets at the exits. Thanks, as always, to Minnesota Public Radio for recording and broadcasting all of our Town Hall forums. NPR is presenting the Town Hall Forum, the whole fall series, in one special week of programming. You'll be able to hear all four talks offered this fall, the week of December 5th. And one program will air each day at noon during that week. And on Thursday, December 8th, there'll be a live broadcast from our sanctuary. You can always watch or listen to our programs live on the Town Hall Forum website or on the Facebook page, and we're delighted to have you who are live streaming with us today virtually in the room. And thanks, as always, to our media sponsors. MinnPost is the source for nonpartisan news coverage of Minnesota and beyond. Find them at minnpost.com. Thanks as well to Sahan Journal, covering issues affecting Minnesota immigrants and communities of color. Learn more about them at sahanjournal.com. In the second half of today's program, Mr. Reckford will be taking questions from the audience. Those of you with us in the sanctuary will find a blank question card in your materials. If you would use that to note a question for our speaker, and we will collect them. An usher will get them down front, and we'll ask as many of them as possible. If you're watching online, please plan to participate by writing your questions into the chat feature on the live stream. We're monitoring that. We'll collect those as well and ask as many as we can. And now it is my pleasure to introduce today's Westminster Town Hall Forum speaker, Jonathan Reckford. Jonathan Reckford serves as Chief Executive Officer of Habitat for Humanity International, a global Christian housing organization. Its work has helped more than 39 million people construct, rehabilitate, or preserve their homes. He has served in that role since 2005. Before his leadership at Habitat, he served as the executive pastor at Christ Presbyterian Church in Edina. So he was in our own area here before going to this leadership post at Habitat. Much of the early part of Mr. Reckford's career was in the for-profit sector, including executive and management positions at Marriott, the Walt Disney Company, and Best Buy. He's a member of the Freddie Mac Housing Advisory Council, as well as the Council on Foreign Relations and the Urban Steering Committee of the World Economic Forum at Davos. The nonprofit Times named him one of the most influential nonprofit leaders in America. He's the author of Our Better Angels, 7 Simple Virtues That Will Change Your Life and the World. Please join me in welcoming to the Westminster Town Hall Forum, Jonathan Reckford.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon. It is a joy to be back in Minnesota and wonderful to be with all you. Thank you, Tim, for your hospitality. We're weary. We all feel the weight of a house divided, the chaos of disconnection and misunderstanding. It seems we've lost our ability to have civil discourse, when increasingly people define themselves by what they are against rather than what they believe in. Culture wars ensue. Willing to go to seemingly any extreme, participants on differing sides of various issues can be quick to label anyone who does not agree with them as bad or even evil. Our society, and even some factions of the church, have become consumed with winning. That leads to cynicism, like this word from the late Mark Shields, a political pundit and PBS analyst. There are 2 kinds of political parties, just like there are 2 kinds of churches, he proclaimed. Those who seek out converts and those who hunt down heretics. Feeding that divide has become big business. Political leaders raise more money and motivate their base by making people afraid and angry. Cable networks sell more ads and get more attention by being extreme. And social media algorithms reward engagement by amplifying the same rhetoric. In culture wars, people do not see one another as fellow citizens, but rather they identify others as either allies or enemies. The fear by those who dig in is that if they don't fight to win, they're going to lose something they hold dear. The issues that elicit passionate responses often are not trivial. They're about deep moral and ethical concerns that matter. But such polarization means we have to choose what side we are on. And that has created a societal identity crisis. Every issue then comes down to all or nothing. Either we win or they win. That makes it challenging to live together as citizens. Historically, our pluralistic society has had to take on these crucial issues in ways that enable us to live together. People had to allow for there to be simultaneous and different answers to critical questions. That's hard. It means individuals must engage with and live in community with those who do not support their positions. However, as institutions like families, faith communities, and community service groups have eroded, people began to look to national level organizations in an effort to belong. When that happens, people are pushed to form tribes, particularly through the internet and social media. Those groupings become echo chambers rather than spaces in which we can learn and grow. The need to belong has pushed people to adopt more absolutist thinking. A report created by the group Beyond Conflict says the more a value is seen to be under threat by an outgroup, the more sacred it may become, thereby increasing people's resistance to reason-based dialogue and negotiation. Authors of the report said that people are also more likely to deem a stance as inviolable and sacred if they perceive that holding the position is a contingency of in-group belonging. There's a great fear of being kicked out of your own tribe. holding disparate views on issues that people deem profoundly important, as well as opinions on matters that some consider trivial, has too often devolved into hate-filled verbal attacks. In worst-case scenarios, violence has erupted. On the other extreme, people turn inward, unwilling to engage in difficult conversations. During the COVID pandemic, that left many people alone with their troubling thoughts. Sociologist Ann Swidler says that in settled times, traditions and mores influence our actions. But in unsettled times, ideologies begin to shape our strategy and behavior. So why is it so difficult to collaborate and compromise? Adam Kahane, who worked with leaders in South Africa on a plan to navigate a new society after apartheid, says that in an authentic collaborative environment, a space exists for struggling with real differences of opinion. Difficulties arise when people become more concerned with losing something important than solving a problem. The question, if I collaborate with you, what will I have to give up, is very real. My community is facing that right now in conversations about changing zoning to create more opportunities for housing for service and low-income workers. In other places, school leaders wrestle with what's okay to teach about race and what books are in the library. The church has its own heated set of debates around sexuality that has resulted in major splits. I personally find it discouraging that people who espouse belief in God are having conversations with the same vitriol as secular organizations. Getting past the fear of loss can be very difficult. Kahane points out that many people approach collaboration claiming that they are willing to talk about a matter, but in reality, they have dug into their position and the belief that only their position matters. They believe a solution will be reached when the other side changes the way that they think and what they are doing. When those conversations fail, Kahane says people are forced into a different kind of conversation in which parties say, I'm going to listen to this person or visit in her community. I'm not saying that we'll agree, and I don't have to surrender my beliefs, but we can talk. He offers a helpful visual around the word suspend. He suggests that in collaboration, we literally think of suspending our beliefs in front of us for examination. Rather than trying to convince the other person that we are right, he suggests that we ask a person with differing views to examine the idea carefully with words like, this is what I think, but it's just my opinion. What do you think? Those conversations require people to be vulnerable and requires that they be able to say, I don't understand your ideas. A turning point in collaboration occurs the moment when everyone figures out that for the situation to change, they have to change. When this happens, Kahane says, everything moves. I think it's interesting to consider his thoughts on surrender in biblical terms. Surrendering to Jesus is humbly placing ourselves at his feet and giving up our desire for control and pride. What a healing posture. Vocabulary and definitions are fascinating when we think about living in a house divided. Data collected by the PACE organization on the idea of bridging our divides suggests that the words we use to describe our beliefs can exacerbate divisiveness. Think of a continuum from 1 to 5, with 1 being the far right, those with very conservative viewpoints, and 5 being the far left. People holding strong liberal opinions use language that demonstrates purity to other 5s, but the research shows that those words are actually off-putting to 4s and alienate 3s, let alone impacting the 1s or 2s. The same dynamic is true in reverse for those who hold strong conservative views. So if we're not careful, we can drive away those who might be willing to listen to our viewpoints simply by being more careful with the language we choose. Therefore, if the goal is to win a majority and get things done, using inflammatory, even party line language is counterproductive. That's why the temperature keeps going up and we're losing ground in so many ways. So we've admired the problem. What can we do about it? First of all, this is so important. We must accept that we don't have to agree with people in order to work with them or to engage with them. It's one of the great strengths that pulled me to Habitat for Humanity. We've long recognized the need to bring people together. Over and over, we hear how Habitat projects have attracted young and old, executives and laborers, blacks and whites, Catholics and Protestants, Hindus and Muslims, even Democrats and Republicans. Sometimes, working on a Habitat project is one of the first opportunities people have had to interact across one of the toughest divides with someone outside their socioeconomic class. Serving together towards a common purpose and building genuine relationships is one of the best antidotes I know for our divided world. Best-selling author and speaker William Ury, who helps people find solutions to problems ranging from everyday disagreements to global conflicts, suggests that rather than sitting across the table from one another to have a hard conversation, people should go for a walk together and get a new perspective. Better yet, he told me, go build a Habitat house together. Let me share some brief examples of ways in which Habitat's work has transformed lives. The first example is of an imam who had partnered with Habitat in Egypt several years ago to build his home. A Coptic Christian neighbor had been so helpful to his neighbors that the imam was conflicted when he learned that construction could not begin on the home of the Christian family in his community until their previous home was demolished. That meant the family would be homeless for 3 months. The imam felt so blessed by the love shown to him by Habitat and the family, so despite initial feelings of discomfort, he invited the family in and shared his home with them. A similar story about people of different faiths coming together took place in Durham, North Carolina. Organizers of a build that included both a Jewish and Christian congregation scheduled a Sunday build so that the congregation at Bethel Synagogue could participate. The day before, however, a gunman had shot and killed 11 congregants at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh. Some of you may remember that massacre. Several people wondered if it would be appropriate to work on the home, which would be purchased by a Muslim family. The best response to such a tragedy, they decided, was to come together in the community and love one another. So work on the home proceeded. There they were, a group of Jews and Christians and Muslims working side by side to build a home with Muslim immigrants from Saudi Arabia and Somalia. The volunteers didn't dwell on what had happened the day before. They focused on the strength and compassion of their community. The third example comes from Vietnam. Decades after the Vietnam War, we regularly bring veterans who served in the U.S. Armed Forces back to Vietnam to build with families in need. I've experienced this on each of my trips to Vietnam. Working alongside veterans from North Vietnam turns out to be very cathartic for veterans on both sides. Building alongside future homeowners, doing something redemptive and constructive, and telling stories from each country's perspective helps heal old wounds and help them move forward. I often feel like I'm moving between two worlds. There's the world of the national news, a place where tragedy headlines and fear and discord rule. And then there's the world of Habitat, a place where one of the ways we define success is how we help each other, how deeply we connect to those we serve. That's certainly true in this example from South Africa. Less than a decade after legalized racism was abolished there, blacks and whites worked side by side to build the first intentionally developed mixed-race community post-apartheid. The community was in Durban and built in 2002 as part of the Carter Work Project by Habitat volunteers including Jimmy and Rosalind Carter, Gracia Machel, wife of former South African President Nelson Mandela, and presidents of Kenya, Mozambique, and Malawi. Each year for more than 35 years, the Carters have traveled across the world with Habitat, donating their time and voices to build and improve homes and build community. Archbishop Desmond Tutu, patron of our work in South Africa, said, "As the physical walls of the house go up, the invisible walls that separate us as people come tumbling down, and hope is built in the community." That's such a lovely picture of what love in action looks like. When we have the heart of a servant, we can bring people together and build bridges. I've heard arguments that you can't do interfaith work and make your own faith claim. I would say that my friends of other faiths would be deeply discouraged by that idea. I've seen two versions of interfaith efforts. The first is that in order to work together, we have to all agree theologically. And I've never seen that work anywhere in the world. The second version, which I think works beautifully, is the recognition that almost every faith in the world shares values around serving in the community and serving those in need. Out of that shared value, we can build relationships and build community. The physical activity of working together on a build site or any other kind of service enables us to be bridge builders and trust builders. Creating relationships in an environment of respect can lead to productive conversations and new understandings. You can see miraculous things happen when people actually do something that appeals to their shared values. They can focus on what they have in common with others as opposed to what separates them. Just days ago, I was at the White House where President Joe Biden announced a new commitment in which Habitat will be working with Interfaith USA and the YMCA through a nation of bridge builders to train 10,000 leaders and host 1,000 events in 300 communities across the United States. At Habitat, we've also launched our beloved community efforts based on the vision of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Our focus is on creating a community that includes diversity and allows for tension undergirded by love. To do so, we must truly love our neighbors as we love ourselves. We must change, and we must commit to tangible action. Other avenues for service are also great steps towards bringing people together. Our federal government has demonstrated that through the National Service Model, the AmeriCorps Vista program. In my perfect world, all young people would take a year off after high school and serve. It's an ideal way to create meaningful relationships and to work with people who are different from you in many ways. An example closer to home is rooted right here in this area. In fact, in this church. I previously served, as Tim said, on the staff of Christ Presbyterian in Edina. That congregation and the one here at Westminster differed on some theological issues, but we shared a deep commitment to serving in the community. At that time, many of our collective efforts were focused on the HIV/AIDS crisis, both in Africa and Minneapolis. Church leaders recognized the value of coming together in relationship and listening to one another. We created space for common ground when staff members and elders intentionally listened to one another's ideas. There was a lot of disagreement, but what made it work was the mutual respect earned by seeing congregants showing up in great volume to serve. That was hard to be against. I know you'll be shocked to hear a housing person say that housing can be a part of the answer to the challenges of the culture wars. In this country, we organized our cities to be intentionally economically and racially segregated. This was true nationally. When we moved to Minneapolis in the late 90s, some neighborhoods still had racial covenants on their deeds. They were not enforced, but they were there. Even after redlining was outlawed, exclusionary zoning enabled the same outcomes. Intentional efforts by those who designed housing systems helped create many problems. Therefore, we can only bring about meaningful change by taking intentional steps to create neighborhoods that support all residents and are welcoming to all. I firmly believe that one way to do that is to create and focus on mixed-income, mixed-use communities. Research by Harvard economist Raj Chetty has shown that low-income children growing up in mixed-income communities realize relatively strong social mobility. Mixed-income neighborhoods also produce better long-term health and economic outcomes, and diverse communities enable all residents to build new social ties that create positive change and a better quality of life for everyone. Creating housing that is affordable near the places where people work is better for the families and for our environment. In many communities, particularly those that think of themselves as progressive, a lot of people think that designing mixed-use, mixed-income neighborhoods is a great idea, as long as it happens somewhere else. Getting buy-in and convincing people that they're not going to lose something by changing the makeup of their neighborhoods can be very difficult, but the outcomes can be very positive. If we are to calm the rhetoric and seek to understand the points of view of many community members, the public, private, and social sectors must be willing to sit down at the table or take that walk that Bill Urey spoke about. As always, people of faith need to model good behavior. Jesus didn't say only love the neighbors that agree with our politics. In fact, Jesus said to love our enemies and to pray for those who persecute us. Followers of Jesus are called to be less concerned about winning and more concerned about loving. We have to hold ourselves and others accountable. Have we gotten caught up in the labeling and the name-calling? Are we willing to call out poor behavior or excesses from our own tribe? That takes courage. In his book, Jesus Outside the Lines, Scott Saul says Christians are in many ways a band of opposites who over time grow to love one another through the centering, unifying love of Jesus. But there's more to unity than the cooling down of hostilities, he said. People from different perspectives can learn and mature as they listen humbly and carefully to one another. Recently, I heard a powerful message about the Apostle Paul's words from Ephesians 4 that are so familiar. Speak the truth in love. Breaking down that phrase calls us to specific and loving actions. First, we are to speak up. Ignoring the problem or talking about others behind their backs does not solve anything. Second, we are to speak the truth. How many times have we repeated something we heard before we had all the facts? Particularly in this time of knee-jerk reactions, we need to make sure we are speaking the truth. That means we're careful with what we offer as fact. And we consider how the things we say align with biblical truths. Then we are to heed the call of the whole phrase, speak the truth in love. It's amazing how much more truth we can learn by seeking out the best in people. What efforts must each of us make to have meaningful relationships with people who differ politically? I will be the first to admit it is not easy. Too many people have become so entrenched with their side that they defend the indefensible from their team and refuse to acknowledge any good from those who do not support their positions. In fact, Arthur Brooks says in his book, Love Your Enemies, that following the 2016 U.S. election, 1 in 6 Americans had stopped talking to a family member or close friend. Imagine breaking ties with someone you cared for, loved deeply, because of political differences. Imagine also what opportunities we have missed to get to know wonderful people because we've made assumptions about them and drawn a line in the sand. When I started at Habitat more than 15 years ago, both former President Carter and the late Representative Jack Kemp were on our board of directors. They would have never agreed on economic policy, but they cared deeply about our work and were motivated by their faith. When Kemp debated Al Gore in the vice presidential debates in 1996, Kemp said, "We do not see Al Gore and Bill Clinton as our enemy. We see them as our opponents." He cited Abraham Lincoln in the proclamation, "You serve your party best by serving the nation first." So this call for civility is nothing new. My prayer is that more people would choose this model of servant leadership. I hope that people of faith around the world will rise up and commit to being truth seekers who are eager to have respectful conversations and willing to learn from one another. And for each of us, that always starts with me. We are called to be involved in politics in the sense that we advocate for our neighbors, seek justice for everyone, and work to create communities that are thriving and inviting for all. My passion for bringing about positive change goes back generations in my family. My grandmother, Millicent Fenwick, was an elegant and forceful New Jersey congresswoman who was committed to issues of social justice. She was not your stereotypical grandma in the 60s and was never timid about speaking her mind. Every time I saw her, she would challenge my sisters and brothers and me to be useful. That was her definition of the good life. She would then recite what was her life verse from the Bible, Micah 6:8. He has shown you, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you, but to act justly, to love mercy, to walk humbly with your God. So I want to echo my grandmother today and ask, how will you be useful? Sometimes it takes a crisis to get us to pay attention to our shared humanity. Crises like the one we're facing in this country can destroy us, or they can be great reminders of what we can accomplish when we work together. During President Lincoln's first inaugural address, our nation was on the verge of war. Several states had seceded. We are not enemies, he said, but friends. Though passion may have strained, it must not break our bonds of affection. Then he expressed the hope that if we could all remember our shared unity, we would hearken to the better angels of our nature. The Apostle Paul reminds us in the letter to the Philippians that Jesus was not on this earth to win. In fact, in an effort to reconcile human beings to God and to one another, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. It's my hope that if we can anchor ourselves in God's love, then moving forward, we can be led by our better angels instead of by our personal self-interest, disagreements, or disappointments. That will require intentional action and a willingness to compromise and reach out in love. Will you commit to the slow, deep work of transforming relationships, including with those whom you may deeply disagree? What would you give up to build the kind of community we all yearn for? What can each of us do to be hope builders in a world that is so hungry for real community? Thank you. God bless you.
Thank you, Jonathan Reckford. This is the Westminster Town Hall Forum coming to you from Westminster Presbyterian Church in downtown Minneapolis. I'm Tim Hart Anderson, Senior Minister at Westminster and moderator of the forum. Our speaker today is Jonathan Reckford, CEO of Habitat for Humanity International. If you're here in the sanctuary, we invite you to write a question on a card, hold it up for one of our ushers to collect. If you're watching online in the live stream, please put your questions into the chat and we can pick them up there. And while the ushers begin collecting questions, I'd like to thank our broadcast partner, Minnesota Public Radio. NPR will broadcast this fall's forums as a special week of programs starting December 5th. December 5, one program from Healing Our House Divided will air each day at noon that first week of December, including a live broadcast of our Thursday, December 8th forum. And thanks to our other media partners, MinnPost, a source of nonpartisan news about Minnesota and beyond. Find their coverage at minnpost.com. And thanks to Sahan Journal, providing coverage of Minnesota immigrants and communities of color. Look for their work at sahanjournal.com. And now a note for those of you who are here in person, free breads and spreads reception is being offered in the Westminster Hall following this program, and we'll look for continuing the conversation as we enjoy refreshments. Those receptions allow us to build community, not just come listen to a program, but get to know one another. And we invite you to join us together at the next Town Hall Forum so we can continue to build community around important issues. And now, Mr. Reckford, if you're ready, I'll present the questions from the audience as you return to the pulpit. Appreciate, especially in a sanctuary in a Christian church, your emphasis on faithfulness and the sense of a God-given call and vocation to love one another. Habitat is an explicitly Christian organization, but many people don't realize that. They want to help out build houses and they jump in. Is there a place for someone who approaches the need for civility and working together and finding oneness, who is not a Christian or not a God follower?
So, yes, I can stop there.
I thought you'd say that.
But let me amplify slightly. I think this goes to deep, it's a deep human value. And so to me, Habitat is not a church, and we have a long-standing phrase that I've loved, which is God is our center, but not our border. And we joyfully welcome everyone to come and participate in the work. And I believe these issues are really human issues that transcend. So for me personally, that's the motivation for me to engage in this work. But I think this is true across faiths, and true really from a core human value for people even of no faith, in terms of, I think we all want to be part of community, and especially after these 2 years of COVID, I think there's a deep sense that we can do better than this, but our systems are reinforcing kind of the loudest minority voices versus a larger voice.
When I speak of that very question, I say people of faith and people of goodwill. There are a lot of people of goodwill who are not people of faith. Appreciate that response. Could you describe for us what you see when you go to sort of national gatherings of leaders, of nonprofit leaders perhaps, or other leaders, in terms of the very questions you're talking about? Is there a sense of a need across leadership in the country for coming together in new ways?
I do think it is growing. I think people are, the first part is very clear. People are not happy with the status quo. The second part is less clear, that they are willing to give up or move to change the status quo. And I think that's the part we need to strengthen and rally engagement around. But it's so interesting. When you stay at I had dinner with James Fallows, a writer I respect, and he spent a lot of the last many years going around to secondary and tertiary cities and trying to study what's working and not working. And he made a comment I thought was great, which is if you ask a question in one of these communities about national politics, everyone's IQ goes down 20%. But if you ask about that issue in the local context, you get a very different response because it's within community and relationship, and people think about things differently. So I'm actually more optimistic that we can do this at the community level, and then hopefully if we do enough of it at the community level, that can start to have impact at the broader level.
The importance of political leadership in this is so critical. And do you see that kind of leadership emerging somewhere in the national stage?
I think it's tough. We were talking a little bit about this last night. It's been true forever, but it's only getting worse that our current party system, we have carefully gerrymandered our districts in such a way that most of them are now safe districts. And so the biggest risk, if you're a politician who would like to get reelected, and one of the things that politicians most like is to get reelected, it behooves you to protect your flank. Your risk of losing to the other party is lower than it's ever been. Your risk of losing to someone more extreme in your own party is significant. And that actually pushes people the wrong direction. And you raise more money, as I mentioned, by pushing out. So I think there is a deep hunger for better, but I think people don't know how to get out of this loop of having to go far out to the far left or to the far right in order to secure their base. And we've got fewer and fewer, lots of independents, but fewer swing districts and fewer persuadable independents now. And I desperately hope that will change. We used to have a large number of Democrats who were more conservative than many Republicans, and we used to have lots of Republicans who were more liberal than many Democrats. Those have almost disappeared now, and so it's going to take creativity, and I think enough people being willing to push for people that are willing to be actually problem solvers. I'm very pragmatic. I want to see things actually get done, and I think sometimes at the edges people are more interested in being right than being in relationship, back to family planning or family counseling, and more interested in sort of demonstrating purity than actually legislating and creating movement. And we deeply need to move on that because these are big issues.
You described the value of people of different perspectives coming together to build something, in your case with Habitat, a home, to heal the house divided by building a new house or rehabbing an existing home. Can you tell us, give witness perhaps to a case where you know people of different political persuasions came together to build and that changed later behavior?
You know, I've seen...
Is there evidence for your argument, I guess?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I've joked, the thing I never thought I would see, and this is a regional one, was Duke and UNC athletes actually building together. And it is, but the longitudinal data is less clear in that scenario. It is, I think what I know I have seen is that I have watched at a more micro level, so less the senator coming in and changing his position, but at a city council level, I have seen over and over again where somebody who was staunchly a NIMBY fighter, you know, not in my backyard, not in my district, when they actually had meaningful, deeper interaction and relationship built, that led to turning from being an opponent to being an advocate of mixed income housing and building more housing. And I think it is, and I've certainly seen at local advocates see real change of heart through relationship. So I am optimistic. I wish I had wonderful examples of aha moments at the national politics, but I do think, you know, I've seen it. You know, President Carter, one of my heroes. You know, we have built with people from the full political spectrum, and I do think there's value to the relationship. So one of the things that we've certainly heard from members of Congress is in the old days, even people who bitterly fought had personal relationships, and there was real value in that, and that led to the ability to get stuff done. In today's era, where the politicians don't socialize with people from the other tribe, that makes it much harder to get to those 60 votes, makes it harder to be, and that's, I do think, whether it is Habitat or any other form, the intentional bridging around some shared value creates at least the space for some dialogue or compromise.
You mentioned in your talk your support for a kind of a national year of national service as a mandated requirement for high school graduates or people at a certain age. Are you a lone voice in that, or is there a movement to establish such a required year of service?
There is a movement. I have been part of a group called Voices for National Service for 15 years. It's a long shot. You know, there have been steps to grow national service. For those of you who are not familiar, Habitat engages usually around 400 young AmeriCorps and Vista, not so young Vista sometimes, volunteers. And they really leverage volunteers, but it creates an opportunity that we've seen in many countries and cultures, that national service historically through military created that social and cultural bonding where people had to work with people who were very different from, we don't need a massive military right now. So to me, national service would be a more logical view. But if we want to, in a world where people are increasingly living in places only with people like them, and are so socioeconomically divided, I think in some ways it would not be a magic bullet, but it would be a meaningful way to start creating some common culture around our glorious differences in this country.
I could imagine some of our other speakers in other forums having a response to what you said today, supportive basically, but also saying that's easy for you to say. To come at this question of our house divided and make some really good suggestions, but you're not on the receiving end of the brutalities and cruelties of history like some others have been. And let's hear you try to convince someone who is really desperate for change and eager for some new political environment to be created here because it affects them personally, systemically. How would you convince them to do the kind of jump in and serve with me and let's change the world together approach? You know,
I would actually blend the moral and practical arguments, and I tried to do a little bit of that today, which is ultimately, do you want to just vent or do you want to create change? And if you want to create change, you have to build, ultimately, you've got to build a majority to get there. And so to me, it's actually very practical. I support your desire for change. How do you get from here to there? And to get from here to there, you've got to change other people's hearts and minds in a way that they will support that change. And to do that, if you're doing it by hitting them with a bat. It's possible that will help, but it is historically not the most effective way to create social change. And I really believe people have to ultimately be loved into change, not beaten into change. And if you want to create sustainable change. And so it is not to in any way diminish the fervor and the passion, and I support the need for change. It's how do we actually get there in a way that brings society along. And when we've seen the great changes, including civil rights, where my family was deeply involved, the courage of doing nonviolent protest actually, I think, was incredibly effective, though with some really tough consequences.
We have some online viewers who are sending in questions, and this is one related to what you've just said. And what should the response be to those who are actively advocating for violence for political change? Yeah, I think that is the ultimate lose-lose, and it's really hard to find examples, and the examples in our own country are tragic in terms of, and I think, unfortunately, violence tends to lead to backlash and more violence. It does not lead to winning hearts because people will either shut down or get defensive or be violent in return. And I don't think any of those scenarios ultimately get us to the kind of society or community we want to build. And it's, I don't pretend any of this is easy, and I certainly don't pretend I have the answers to these really complex issues. But I'm quite confident that for people of faith or goodwill, violence is not the answer. You described a continuum of the ones to the fives in your remarks, and noted that the language each is using is what's alienating the fours and the threes and the twos. What are the words, what's the vocabulary that you would suggest to those who are on the five end to speak in new ways? What language should be used, or those on the one end? Yeah, it's really hard. I mean, the starting point is choosing words that are, you kind of know. Are you using that word to alienate and get attention, or are you using that word, if you took the inverse, the antonym of whatever word you're using, would that help you move to the other direction? And it is, people are actually, a big chunk of the country, the data would show, are hungry for unity. They actually want to see progress. They want to see movement. There's a lot of openness, but they don't get attention because that doesn't win eyeballs, that doesn't sell ads, that doesn't make money. And so I think the question would be to test it out and say, okay, if I want to win 60%, am I willing to still be prophetic, but do it in a way that is inviting and intentionally inviting versus polarizing? And I think the tendency is, well, they're awful, so I am going to push even harder, and both sides end up moving further out and getting more extreme in their language. And so it is really tough to change, but it comes back to what I've seen, and I gave Habitat examples because that's my context, but lots of kinds of service will solve this in the same way. But when you think about what caused you to change a deeply held position, it is probably extremely unlikely that somebody either physically accosting you or berating you caused you to change that position. My experience is people change a deeply held position because they build trust with somebody who is different and brings them, and that trust allows for enough room to listen and maybe reshape or shift where they come. And right now we say you're selling out if you change your position. My hope would be, I try to go in saying I could learn and come up with a better position. And now I have new data or new information, and so we've moved. So certainly, and then not punishing people for evolving their positions if they've gotten better information versus a sort of religious attachment to one side or the other side. But I think the hardest part is looking in the mirror, and then we decry what the other side does, but then we adopt the same tactics. And I think the question is, are we willing to and to disarm from some of those tactics, recognize, in a tough world? It's hard. Yeah. In the struggle you referred to with Christ Presbyterian and Westminster and our differences, it was around, among other things, ordination and acceptance of gays and lesbians in the life of the church. And those of us who wanted change in that area, it took us about 20 years to get change. And it was a lot of loss along the way and a lot of effort to try to keep the church whole. We didn't entirely succeed, but we discovered the importance of patience for this kind of change. And we're not a patient world, a patient society. How can we learn to let the time that needs to pass for healing a house divided happen? How do we do that? The instant gratification works against us.
No, it's a great point. And, that's such a powerful example, because when I think about people who've changed, they changed because they had a meaningful relationship with someone who had a different sexuality. And it's usually that deep personal relationship and love that actually caused the change of heart, not going to battle.
Exactly, and those relationships take time. But
I do think it's slow work, and to keep kind of the long view. And certainly for those of people of faith, we're called to the long view. We're not called to instant gratification or win, and nor should we even potentially expect to win. But what we're called to is to continue to serve and love. But I do think. I think community transformation is slow and messy. I was sharing with some of my Minnesota Habitat colleagues this morning that one of my axioms is the only thing worse than partnering is not partnering. So partnering is slow and messy and hard and complicated, but it's the only way you ultimately get to change. And I think you just have to keep that intent and keep pushing step by step. And sometimes, I think about the spiritual father of Habitat. He died never having any idea the impact his ideas were going to have in terms of global impact, but he was faithful.
In your now, 15 years with Habitat, have you seen yourself change? In what kinds of ways could you describe you've changed, perhaps?
It's a really good question. I think it's hard to believe this is my 18th year now, and it is... I think what's hard to this whole topic is I increasingly, having traveled all over the world and seen a really wide variety of contexts, I increasingly see the world as deeply complex and gray. And in a time where the media everything wants to be simplified to 140 characters of black and white. And so certainly I have learned so much about context, and certainly learned, I would say, so it's humbling. I am less sure about most absolutes, having lived in it. I am more confident of the deep value of building relationship. And I think one of the tensions when we want scale is there is a tension between scale and depth. And I think that can be a challenge for the faith world as well. The metrics for churches are far from perfect. How many bodies are in seats and what your budget is are very poor metrics for spiritual transformation. And it is what you really want are heart meters, and to see are we actually shifting hearts and minds. And I think my heart is softer. In some ways, I'm harder-headed and softer-hearted, which is you got to be very practical, and sort of resilient and determined to play the long game. But I think what keeps my heart soft is going into the communities in so many different contexts and seeing and building relationships with people who live wildly differently. And that's given me deep respect for the resilience and strength of families who live in conditions we cannot imagine, but also a deeper urgency for how do we remove barriers so that they can really grow into all that God intends for their lives.
You made an allusion to social media in that response. Very good. Thank you for the response. But is social media helpful in our attempt to heal the house divided, or is it hurtful? I'll now go from preaching to meddling, as a friend of mine would say. It's
Go for it. I used to be an optimist. At first it was great. I can connect to my friends in other countries. I can see what my children and godchildren and their friends are doing, and I was so excited about it. And, for me, a little bit of an inflection point was Tahrir Square in Egypt, if you remember when that erupted. And we have a very strong habitat program in Egypt, and I was checking in with our team, and they were so excited about the change. And it was overstated how much social media helped with the change. And I remember thinking there are probably 10 outcomes and 9 of them are bad. So there was so much optimism that they could tear down the Mubarak regime, which they succeeded in. but then there was no plan for how to replace that with a better structure or system. And what we've seen, unfortunately, is conditions have gotten significantly worse, not better. And my observation with that is that it's easy to tear down institutions and really hard to build them. Social media is better at breaking than fixing, and better at destroying than building. And I think we've seen really negative impacts that the algorithms, I can give, a horrific example, and you could pick them from both sides. I try to mostly stay off social media. I'm professionally on Twitter and a few things for Habitat. And it is, but if you ever go down, and every now and then I'll sort of go down a right-wing trail, then go down a left-wing trail just to understand what is going on. And I remember after the horrific Floyd murder, there was so much good change that came out of that tragedy. But if you looked at what the echo chambers people were living in, I remember at that time, on the one side, if you were on the far left, all you got fed by the algorithms were images of Nazi skinhead protests and anti-Semitic and racist rants and marches, and in a constant feed. If you were on the right side, you were getting a constant feed of a video, this was this one snapshot, of protesters blocking the entrance to a hospital in Southern California so a shot policewoman who had just been assassinated couldn't get in, and they're chanting, "We hope she dies." Now, no matter what your point of view is, both of those are horrific. And we need people, conservatives should be standing up and staunchly opposing those horrors on the right, and goodwill people on the far left should be supporting the intent, but absolutely not condoning badly unethical behavior. But if that's what you see over and over and over again, the response is, well, those people don't disagree with me. Those are bad people on the other side. And I think people get caught up in choosing their own news, choosing their own information, getting a different set of what they believe to be true. And so I'm unfortunately a skeptic at this point that they're making large money off dividing, but that's a tough answer.
Yeah, thank you for that answer. We have time really for one more question. It's about your sense of being hopeful. You deal in global forums and local and down-to-earth communities and national politics. You have a close-up view of the house divided, I guess I would say. And are you hopeful that we might somehow heal this house divided?
I am hopeful. It is, and I hope we all need to be hopeful. So, hope is that view of a better future. And we can't give up hope, because if people give up hope, we accept the status quo. And I think hope is, and the reason I'm hopeful is at the local level, I see these great things happening over and over and over again. And at the neighbor level and at the community level, I see powerful examples of people coming together and solving problems and fixing things. And that really does give me hope. And so I've seen what is possible. Now what we just need to do is increase the army of on that side of the vision. But I do really believe that it is our collective actions that will build momentum so that we have more hope for everybody.
Thank you, Jonathan Reckford, for speaking to the Westminster Town Hall Forum.
Great to be with you all. Thank you.
Those of you who have the privilege of being here, let's go get something to eat at Breads and Spreads. We'll see you for upcoming forums live in person here. And thank you for your support.